Welcome to Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast that's your ultimate guide to mastering personal finances and unlocking the secrets of entrepreneurship. Each week, we dive into the world of personal finance and business development and have fascinating conversations with industry experts, seasoned entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their insights, strategies, and stories to help you get ahead in life. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur looking to scale your business or someone just starting out on your financial path, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable insights.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher Panayiotou, certified financial planning professional, the Cap in Capitalize. And on today's episode, we are going to get into a topic that is extremely enticing, but a little bit controversial: retiring early. But before we get into the meat and potatoes of the episode, the free advice for the week. Summer months are the best time for you to professionally and financially work on yourself while taking a step back from approaching both as you are in them consistently. So what do I mean by that? There's a concept in business, and I've talked about this a little bit in the past, how a lot of people, when you start a business, you're working in the business all the time. I mean, because if you don't, the business will just die. But as time goes on, you build up staff, you build up layers to your staff. The only decisions that are left for you to do, because all the little things are taken care of, are the big decisions in the big money movers within the business. And that's where you're working on the business, whether you're a visionary or an executive like a CEO or CFO. It doesn't really matter. Those big things are what actually move the needle. But no one really applies this to their day-to-day lives in the world of personal finance. In the summer months, especially being in Washington State, where I'm located, Western Washington to be specific, we only get sun for like 3 to 4 months out of the year. And so all of us like Western Washington people just come out of the woodworks because we haven't seen sun for months. And so no one really thinks about, frankly, doing a whole heck of a lot other than getting that vitamin D. Well, I can tell you what separates those that are the most successful locally from those that are not, or those that are the most successful are actively working on themselves when everyone else is just shutting off. And you should do the same. So, free advice out of the way. Let's get into retiring early. So what does retiring early even mean? So I've talked about this in the past, the FIRE movement. In fact, I dedicated an entire episode to that way back in the day. And it stands for Financial Independence, Retire Early. Very original marketing. Now, just to bullet point it, okay? Because again, if you want to know more in depth, go back and listen to my previous episode. But to bullet point the FIRE movement, you live basically like a hermit, like well within your means. And to the point where like it's almost unhealthy how frugal you are. And then once you save up that money and, you know, you invest it wisely and all that, you still live really frugally, but then you stop working and you can kind of do whatever you want. Okay. That's what a lot of people think of as far as retiring early. But I almost wanted to take the moment or take the time during this episode and redefine what retirement even means. Now, it used to be back in the day when you had like a pension. Like I'll just say with my grandparents, they had a pension, they had their Social Security. Yes, they had their home. Fun fact, my grandparents never had a mortgage. That's pretty crazy to think about. And we actually talked about this on a previous episode with my guest, Rick Plum, the three-legged stool of retirement. So you'd have your Social Security, your pension, and your retirement that you saved up. And then you ride off into the sunset, you call it good. Well, there's a lot that's changed since my grandparents were around. Number one, pensions are just super rare unless you're a public, like a government employee or a municipality, okay? So pensions are kind of done. People are living longer and like a lot longer. So what I've started to see, even in my practice, you see a lot of clients that they have their career that they've worked hard for and they've built up everything off of that career. And then they don't want to retire, but they do this transition into this. It doesn't even have to be part-time work. In many cases, it's like a second career. Because again, if you're living longer, you could get away with having two careers versus back in the day, you worked at one place and then after 30 years you retire, and that's kind of all she wrote. I would say from a retirement standpoint, it's not as black and white as it used to be. You're starting to see people ease into retirement. Obviously, the exception would be because we work with a lot of business owner clients that have sold their business and then they're done. Well, that's pretty cut and dry. Or if you're an executive at a company and your contract is done and you've gotten paid well enough, well, then you're done. But most people, I've noticed, they work for the majority of their career, and then maybe like 5 or 7 years after they're done, because they're maybe not quite done, they go and get an easier job. And I don't want to start listing those because then people are going to get offended. But think of something that's just pretty mindless that you can get paid to do that requires you to get paid, but there's really not a lot of stress to it. Now, there's another thing that has come up recently, and it's this passion career idea. So you get to retirement and you just can't sit around. You just can't do it. And even though you may know, if you're listening into this, that you, statistically speaking, don't have to do anything financially contributing to your family or your situation if you're single, but you want to do something, and you also know that there is compensation that is required for that, well, you can do this passion job or this passion project and you get paid for it. Sure, it could be called consulting. It could just be starting a business because it's fun, tinkering around. Fun fact, by the way, KFC was a passion project back in the day. And that wasn't started by the Colonel himself until I think it was like 60 or 65. So, who knows? I mean, for you boomers out there that are listening in, I mean, you may have the next KFC idea in your back pocket, and now would be a great time to start. So again, there's a ton of variations when it comes to retirement. Now, retiring early is not all sunshine and rainbows because there are challenges to early retirement. We talked about this a smidget earlier, but it's time to dive in a little bit more. Saving aggressively. You are going to have to save much more aggressively. And in many cases, you may have to get lucky with timing from an investment standpoint. And as far as asking yourself how much is enough, the general rule of thumb, and we've talked about this a lot in previous episodes, but it's worth repeating. There's something called the 4% rule in the world of personal finance. And that was founded by Bill Bengen, who came on my show way back in the day, the godfather of 4%. And basically what that means is you take whatever your net worth is or your portfolio, you take 4% out of that at the beginning of every year. And if you do that, there is a 95% chance that your money will outlive you because you don't want to outlive your money, obviously. And it's not the end all be all rule, but it's just a really good place to start. All things being equal, though, I can tell you that 4% average rule when it comes to someone that's going to retire early, and also depending on how early we're talking, you may have to lower that a lot because you're going to be living longer. And so your money has to last that much longer. And unless you hit the next big investment, which newsflash, most of you won't, you got to just come to reality with that. And so not only do you have to save aggressively, but then you're going to have to spend that much more frugally. And it doesn't even matter because a lot of people think about, well, if interest rates are really high, then you can earn more on your savings account. Well, it's all relative. So don't talk yourself into thinking that you can get away with things that seemingly won't apply to you, even though that's absolutely impossible. Now, another thing you got to think about too for retiring early is managing healthcare expenses without employer benefits. So fun little fact. I remember when I was 25. Yeah. And I was just coming off of my family's healthcare insurance. So because at 26, that's when I was officially a man in the world of employer medical benefits. And I was off my family's plan at the tender age of 26. Well, unfortunately, there was some miscommunication within my family. And so for 1 month, I actually didn't have health insurance. And for most people, you can maybe get away with that for a month. But like with my Crohn's disease, thank God right now, knock on wood, I've been off medication since the beginning of the year, and I'm super blessed with that. But for years, I mean, I was medicated since I was 4. And when I was 25, it was no different. And I remember I had to go get medication because I ran out. And normally with copays and all that, I think my medicine was like $50 a month. I mean, it really wasn't anything crazy. Well, that 1 month, it was like $800. And trust me, that month was tight. And not only was it $800, but I'm like, man, if I get sick or I have to go to the ER or whatever. So I lived like a hermit. Like I hardly left other than like my work, because I had to work. But if I could in any way, shape, or form avoid people, I did it for like a month just because I didn't want to know what that bill was going to be. So how's that pertain to early retirement? One, I hope none of you that are listening have Crohn's disease, but two, from a serious standpoint, everything gets more expensive when you don't have insurance. So you just gotta factor that in. And unfortunately, there's no blanket answer as to what is that going to cost for you in retirement. I don't know your health. I don't know your gender. I don't know any of this stuff that would be pertinent to health insurance costs. So it's just something to think about. And like I said, I mean, it can really come back and bite you. And we already mentioned this before I get into the commercial break, but when you retire early, you have to plan for a longer retirement. And, obviously you don't want to outlive your money. Talked about that. And this is something actually kind of crazy. A lot of people, and I'm 33. I've talked to a lot of my friends that are, and actually most of my friends are older, but friends that are my age, if not younger. And it's really not a question to think about how myself and a lot of my colleagues could live to like well into their 90s, or in some cases, well into their hundreds. I mean, when you talk about, there's a number of factors. Chances are, if you're younger and you're listening into the show, you are motivated to become financially secure. And as time goes on average, if you are that self-motivated to become financially secure, you're probably going to become financially secure. And with that comes less stress. With less stress becomes a healthier lifestyle. You can afford health benefits. Like, it all compounds. And it's no shocker that people that are financially more stable and more well off are probably going to live longer. So the fact is, if you are planning to retire early, I mean, let's say that you save up and you grind away and you're like, man, I'm going to retire at 40. Well, man, if you live to 100, you got 60 years for your money to last. And I'm just looking at that going, dude, I mean, unless you're just going to inherit like multi-millions, or if you just sold your business for a gajillion dollars at 40 and you ride off into that sunset, most people don't have those deck of cards. So you've just got to factor in that even though this all sounds great, you need to ask yourself questions that you otherwise wouldn't ask if you retired at a more traditional age. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about investment strategies for early retirees, and then ease into closing this thing off and riding off into the sunset. So don't go anywhere. Stick around.
Are you ready to transform the way you approach sales? This episode is sponsored by the second book in the Capitalize series, Capitalize Your Sales, the all-in-one sales framework that saves you from ever struggling again and teaches you how to sell with sincerity, which dives deep into the art and science of driving sustainable growth. Packed with strategies that go beyond surface-level techniques, This book will help you understand what it takes to truly connect with clients, build long-term relationships, and close deals. Whether you're looking to fine-tune your sales craft or break through to the next level, Capitalize Your Sales offers a roadmap to success designed for today's fast-paced business world. Head on over to your favorite bookstore, order today, and start capitalizing your sales immediately. And now, back to the episode.
Welcome back from the commercial break. I missed you dearly. We're going to get back into retiring early. And as promised, we're going to talk about investment strategies for early retirees. So this is going to be very cliche. So just prep yourself for that. But I do have to say it. You are going to have to balance within your head building, this is strictly when it comes to your portfolio, building a portfolio that balances the maintaining, the maintenance of your lifestyle, so maintaining your income, as well as growing above and beyond the cost of living over time so you can keep up with the standard of living. And that sounds like there's some crystal ball or some investment out there that can do all of that. That's actually that's the farthest thing from the truth. Like, you really have to absorb the framework that I've written about in my first book to understand how to figure all of this out. Okay. And it's going to be much more pertinent because, like I said before the commercial break, you've got a hell of a lot longer to figure this out, as opposed to most people that retire at a traditional age between, in their 60s in general. Now, I also could argue something here, and I just thought of this. Because most people, when you retire, what's your main goal with your money? Your main goal with your money is to first maintain your standard of living, and then secondarily, anything that you have left over, you can quote unquote risk for long-term investments, whether it's the market, real estate, private equity, BDCs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If you're retiring early, I can make a real strong argument that the whole growth and income side of things, that idea goes completely out the window. Because honestly, you have one goal in mind when you retire early, and it is to grow as much as humanly possible, because you can't afford not to, due to the fact that you've got to keep growing to maintain your standard of living for over another half of your life. And, another part of that too is, I say that, and that piggybacks off another important part that I just realized nobody talks about. And that's the way in which you invest your money to get to that. Now, this is going to get a little technical, but you got to hear me out with this. So let's say that that in retirement, you retire early and you've got a much longer runway than most. You're going to have to invest at least some part, or I could argue a decent part of your net worth, into long-term strategies. And we're talking the stock market in this case. Now, that much isn't that's not that technical. But what is a little bit technical is a lot of people, and I see this all the time, and actually I see this a lot in my practice, where clients will go, well, Chris, why are you investing in this company? It doesn't pay a large dividend. Dividends in and of itself, which for those of you that are new, and this is the first episode you've ever listened to, so welcome. Or if you're rather new to the world of finance, you maybe been listening in, but the concept of a dividend doesn't really apply or pertain to your current situation. When you go and own a stock, a piece of a business, some businesses pay you a dividend, which is a little drip of income on a quarterly basis. And in that business, the reason why they're doing that, or that's why they should be doing that, is all things being equal, the business itself has nowhere else, to reinvest that money, meaning they're not reinvesting in research and development. They're not paying down debt. They're not, maybe buying another property to expand. There's all these different things. So if a company has nowhere else to go with that money, on behalf of you, the owner, the shareholder, it's the most prudent thing to pay you what is left over. And that's business 101. If the business owner gets whatever's left over, if there's anything left over. But a misconception in the world of investing is, and I promise this is not a tangent, this does apply to retiring early. It does not matter at all if a company pays a dividend or not. In fact, I could make an argument that it's more beneficial if a company doesn't pay a dividend and it reinvests in the business. And there's a couple of reasons for that. If you've retired early, especially super early, generally speaking, you're taking money not from your retirement account because you would be penalized for that. But we can talk about that later in the episode because there are some tricks and strategies to get around that. But that's beside the point. If you are taking money from a non-retirement account and you have investments that are paying dividends, you're taxed on those. Well, let's say that you have a company that just reinvests in itself. Well, you're not taxed on any of that. Let's say that you have a company that is buying back more of itself, meaning all of these publicly traded shares in this company. If the company knows that it's undervalued, the CEO, if he or she is smart about it, will buy back or essentially take away more of the publicly traded available shares. So that means, relatively speaking, you own proportionately more of the business that you did before the buybacks occurred. So saying it another way, let's say myself, my brother, and my assistant all owned a business, a third. And let's say my brother and I strategically collude behind my assistant's back, and then we buy her out. We would never do that to you, Betty. But the point is, Ty and I my brother, would now own 50% of the business. So that means we would own proportionally more of everything, including the profit. That's the power of a buyback. Well, here's the cool thing with that. When a company buys back more of the stock, it's not a taxable event. For a dividend is taxed. So I could make the argument, all things being equal, if you are retired, you should invest in a number of quality businesses that are reinvesting in itself, and then you only sell and live off of the gains when you need to take the gains, because then you are not taxed as much. Therefore, you will have your money last longer throughout your life. There it is. I know that was a long tangent, but that's how that does tie into the retiring early conversation, because you want to be in a lower tax bracket. Well, ideally you want to pay little as tax forever, period. But especially when you're retired, the greatest return that you can guarantee, other than investing in yourself, is the taxes you can avoid. Now, remember how I said you can't take from your retirement account early without penalties? There are a couple tidbits and tricks with that. So there are several strategies that you can look to when it comes to early access to a retirement account. And the first one is a tax code called Section 72T. And this is probably the most common that is thrown out there, where you take, quote, substantially equal periodic payments from your 401k, 403b, 457, IRA, etc. Now, a couple things with this. It has to go for a minimum of 5 years or until one turns 59 and a half, because once you turn 59 and a half, you can take money from your retirement account without penalties. And so, if you're in your mid-50s, this is actually a pretty common strategy and I've actually used this for a couple clients. But let's talk about if you're in your 40s and 30s. That can get really risky because it has to be substantially equal periodic payments, meaning basically the exact same. Well, if you're 30 years old and you start taking these distributions, it cannot be more over time. So if the cost of living starts to increase, which it will, hate to be a spoiler, in your 40s and 50s, and you're living off that income in your 30s, even if you are a FIRE movement godsend, you are still going to have to increase that cost of living unless you enjoy living in like a honey bucket. So That's where the 72T, like I see this with clients all the time. If you're 50 and above, strong argument that you could use the Section 72T distribution method. But if you're in your 40s and 30s, it's going to just be really, really tough. Now, there's another strategy. It's not nearly as common, but it's called Roth laddering. And it's kind of unique. So with a Roth IRA, okay, you can take out the principal at any time without penalty, anytime. So if you put in, because as of this year, if you're under 50, $7,000. If you're 50 and over, it's $8,000 contribution into your Roth IRA. So fast forward, if you put in 5 years worth, assuming they keep it at the same rates, 7,000 times 5, $35,000. Let's say that thing grew to $100,000. I mean, if that happened, good for you, and I would hire you as an investment professional immediately. But that's beside the point. That original $35,000 you could take out at any time without penalty. So as time goes on, instead of doing the 72T distribution, you could couple that with, assuming you have a Roth IRA, with the Roth IRA distribution and Roth laddering. And that can further basically spread out your distributions and get you to 59 and a half, where at that point, all bets are off and you can take money from either without any penalty. So, you could use that. But now let's get real with it. Let's say that you started contributing to a Roth IRA at 20 and you retire at 40. So that $7,000 a year turns into $140,000 just off of contributions. Well, you could take that $140,000, but I'll tell you, if you're 40 and you're trying to get to 60, that's a pretty slim living for 20 years off of $140,000. Like you got to think about this stuff. Okay. But that is another strategy that you can use within your retirement account to get around that penalty. Now, the obvious one retiring early is lifestyle considerations. And you're going to have to adjust your spending habits when you retire early. It's a no-brainer. And frankly, I'm not against people retiring early. It's just no one actually thinks about this stuff. They just get emotionally attached to all these things. And then when they peel the layers back and they look, they go, oh, shoot, it's not sunshine and rainbows. And I'm in a lot more trouble than I thought I was. So you gotta adjust your spending habits. I can tell you one thing that a lot of people don't talk about that is really sad is maintaining your purpose and engagement outside of work before you retire early, or really just before you retire, period. And there are very few people out there that I've met that can literally just wake up, roll out of bed, watch TV all day, have their 3 meals, and go to bed. Like very, very, very few. And I see this way too often in my practice, actually more so with business owners, because these business owners have dumped their life into these businesses. Because really, I mean, if you've ran a business, you know what I mean by this. And if you've never run a business, that's totally fine. But I can tell you, just from my personal experience, a business is like a baby. I mean, you nurture it. You were there from the beginning. In many cases, you didn't think it could have even succeeded, even though you, in your, just crazy mind, like, that you can't let that thing fail. And then it blossoms into this thing. It starts to pay dividends. It starts to pay for, lifestyle and your family and all that. I mean, it really is. It's like a child that just you see grow up. But the bummer with that is then when eventually someone retires, they've been so invested in their business. And in many cases, that's their identity. They don't have any purpose outside of work. And then they're just empty. And there's no worse feeling. I'm thankful I've never felt this, but I've seen this from a lot of friends and clients that have retired. There is no worse feeling than you retire, you sell your business, and all you have to your name is a lot of money, but you're empty. you really don't have any purpose. That's sad. So you really got to think about the purpose of, okay, if I'm going to retire early, what in the world am I going to do with my life? Now, we've already kind of, before we close this thing out, we've talked about the pros and cons of early retirement. But thinking about it another way, on one hand, yes, there's financial freedom and just freedom in life of just not having to work. But there's also an opportunity cost of not working longer. Like I could actually argue the financial freedom isn't really a pro, because then what happens is you lose a lot of your colleagues that you work with. You lose a lot of your people that you've networked with. Now I get it. If you've got like a entry-level job, or, let's say you work from home and you're not really close to anyone and you kind of just do your own thing, then all right, you're not really losing a network because you didn't really have one to begin with. But you would be stunned how many people through your career are actually pretty involved within your day-to-day life. And then when all that shuts off, yeah, it's kind of cool. There's like a honeymoon phase for a couple weeks, but then you realize, whoa, like, where did everyone go? And you feel as though you're no longer useful. I don't agree with that, but that's just what I've heard from a lot of people. It's like, man, I don't feel useful anymore. And that's sad, So just think about that opportunity cost. I'm not trying to be a downer here. I'm just telling you like it is. And, another thing too, if you're going to retire early, you've got to balance the desire of retiring early with living well today. I actually think the world has a concept, the concept of working, or just the concept of work all backwards. I hear people talk all the time about how, you got to travel the world and you've got to, they're working for the next experience. And that life gets really old really fast. I'm not saying I'm against, travel. In fact, I'm not at all. And I'm not against enjoying new experiences at all. But I can tell you the most successful people I know, and that does not mean the wealthiest. Let me be crystal clear with that. Well-rounded success. Yes, their finances are in check more often than not, but their family's in check and their friendships are in check and their health is in check. Like it's a very well-rounded idea of success. But what I've seen from people that I work with that I look up to a lot, they don't feel like work is work. And they love what they do. They don't love everything that they do all the time. I mean, for crying out loud. I mean, I love what I do, but man, oh man, there is some administrative things that sometimes I've got to do, and it just stinks. You're like, man, this is brutal. But I also know, in the grand scheme of things, I love what I do. And I feel that purpose. I feel the excitement of it. Like in many ways, I feel like I'm on vacation every day. Now, I do love going on vacations, especially with my wife, just getting out of town for 48 hours. For those of you that have little ones, or for those of you that have kids that have grown up, but what it's like having little ones, because we have a 2-year-old. When you have a child, vacation is not a vacation. It is a trip. And there is a difference. Okay. And I can tell you, for me, yes, I love spending time with my family, but man, by the last couple days, I am like a bull just waiting to get back to it. I'm just grinding my hooves into the ground, and I'm excited. Like I miss it. I really, really miss it. And I also know that I'm very blessed to have the job that I have in the career that I have. Very, very blessed for that. Okay. But I'm saying this because, unfortunately, too many people look for like the grass to be greener on the other side. And then you realize like, man, like the grass that you're standing on right now, it's pretty good. It's pretty freaking good. And frankly too, a lot of people will never be able to afford to travel or do all of that. And it's sad because you're chasing the next thing. And then you realize you never were really living in the first place. I mean, there was a quote, and I remember I read this a long time ago. And when I was thinking about this episode, I wrote it down. It's by Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin once said, "Some people die at 25 and aren't buried until 75. And I think that sums up this episode perfectly. You want to choose wisely what you want to do with your life. And for some of you listening, I'm not against retiring early. Like I said, I'm not against it at all. But a lot of people don't think about this stuff. And so for some of you listening, that Ben Franklin quote hits you the right way. I hope that wake-up call gets you to rise from the dead that you otherwise are currently living. So that does it for today's episode on retiring early. I actually had a blast writing this episode. You guys know how to get a hold of me at this point. So as always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Poniotu, certified financial planning professional, the Cap in Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing. Take care. As always, thank you for joining me today. If you have questions about today's episode or any personal finance questions, please reach out to me at Cap and Capitalize on Instagram, Chris at capitalizeyourfinances.com, or via our website, capitalizepodcast.com. If you want more Capitalize Your Finances content, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com and check out our blog, free resources, book, and online course. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Poniotu, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice. There's no guarantee that any investment strategy will meet its stated objective. All investments involve risk, including potential loss of principal. Examples cited are hypothetical, are for illustrative purposes only, are not guaranteed, and subject to potential federal and state law amendments. There's no guarantee that you will achieve the results discussed or illustrated. The information contained herein does not constitute an offer to sell or a solicitation of an offer to buy securities. You should carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses of a non-traded BDC before investing. The prospectus, which contains this and other important information, can be obtained from your financial advisor or the issuer directly. You should read it carefully before investing or sending money. Stock investing includes risks, including fluctuating prices and loss of principal. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. Roth IRA distributions and principal from a Roth IRA are tax-free. However, any earnings will be taxed at ordinary income rates, and a 10% penalty tax will apply if withdrawn prior to age 59.5 or within 5 years of the date the Roth IRA was established, whichever is longer. 401k benefits may be subject to change at your employer, the governing pension, or benefit organization's discretion. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Capitalize Your Finances is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. Christopher Poniotu and Rick Plum are registered representatives with, and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. Capitalize Your Finances LLC is a separate entity from LPL Financial. Capitalize Your Finances is not registered as a broker-dealer or investment advisor. CRPS conferred by College for Financial Planning. The companies and other people mentioned in this podcast are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Capitalize Your Finances.